Welcome back. In a move touted as a significant step towards addressing urban inequality, the DA-led city of Cape Town has announced a new low-cost housing project on a piece of prime, well-located land. The announcement positions the project as a proactive effort to reverse apartheid spatial planning by integrating affordable housing into the city's economic hubs, closer to jobs and opportunities. However, this declaration has been met with immediate and fierce criticism from political opponents, housing activists and community groups. The Good Party's Secretary General, Brett Heron, now joins me to have this conversation. Brett, a very good evening to you. The city of Cape Town says this is historic because the city is putting Cape Town families first and they're addressing the city's spatial planning from the apartheid era. What do you say about this?
Good evening, Masa. Look, it's absolutely true that if housing was to be built on the site that they've announced in their last council meeting, which is a site in the inner city on Ruland Street, then it would address the historical patterns of apartheid that persist in our city. But I think the pushback or the argument or the concern that we would raise is that the DA have been in government in the city of Cape Town for 20 years and in the province for 16 years. And I can give you 20 projects at least that have been announced for release for affordable housing in the inner city by these two governments that have never, ever been developed. And what we're getting is a re-announcement and a re-announcement of the same projects over and over again. The project that the mayor announced in council on Thursday is called the Fruit and Veg Project in Ruland Street in Cape Town. It was announced in September 2017 for affordable and social housing. It was announced in a ceremony on the site in February 2022, hosted by the city, and now again announced on Thursday to much fanfare by the mayor. So it's been announced 3 times with not a single sign of any development on that site. And the same can be said for at least 19 or 20 other sites that I can name in the inner city.
I want to bring in Booi from Ndifuna. I know Ndifuna has been doing a lot of work when it comes to housing and affordable housing in the city of Cape Town. Buhle, you've heard what Brett Heron has to say, the repackaging and re-announcement of the same site as well. What's your reaction to this announcement made by the city?
Thank you very much. As Ndifuna, we've welcomed the announcement that the site will be used for housing, and we've been welcoming this release for quite a number of years now, as Brett has said, because it has been continuously been said. Booi said the same thing, and even went to do sword turning on the site that development would happen. And now the mayor is telling us that the site will be released for social housing. Actually, what has happened is that they've even backtracked from the initial announcement of social housing on that particular site. They're now saying that the site will be used for open market affordable housing, which would cater for a range of 1.8 to 32,000 rands, and that's affordable housing. And there's been misleading reports on newspapers that the site would yield about 273 social housing units, which is not correct. At best, that's a very small site. The Fruit and Veg site is a very small site. Unless you do a density of 8 stories in that building, you can only get about 192 social housing. But with affordable housing, this open market housing that will be developed, the mixed development, that means that would only have about 42 social housing units on that site, which is not a viable development option for Social Housing Institute to develop social housing in. So there is a crisis that we're dealing with. And if they're going with open market affordable housing, that means that majority of people who are low income earners will not benefit from the site, which is the crisis that are fighting. The fight for that site has been that low income earners must benefit. So as an inclusion of social housing must be a component that features greatly. But also we understand that the site is small. And part of what we've been saying is that the city must look at a release of parcels of land right? Because we know that in the same area, there are other parts of land that are underutilized. So if you know that the release, or rather the yield that we'll get from this site is very small, or would cater for only open market, the other sites must be looked at, like the parking, the park that is adjacent to fruit and veg must be subdivided to make space for the development of social housing there. So there are many creative alternatives that could be used by the city of Cape Town to develop social housing on that particular site. But there's lack of creativity and imagination in terms of what the city is doing on that side. And also part of what we've maintained as an organization is that the Parliament parking lot must be used as well to develop housing. Brett sits in the provincial legislature now, and his counterparts in the legislature, the Premier, is responsible for these other sites that are around the fruit and veg site, which was saying that they are used for car storage. It's parking lots. And we're saying those sites must be released to build social housing for people, to assist in these efforts of releasing parcels of land. And these many the releases and statements that re-releases, in fact, that's what it is. It's re-releases. That's what Brett has called it. And I've said in the past that it's isomorphic mimicry that we're dealing with there. They're pretending to be doing something about the housing crisis, but all they're doing is PR stunts by the mayor, which doesn't necessarily address the much needed housing, because many sites have been released in the past. Brett himself released about 11 sites in Woodstock, and none of those sites have been built in the city of Cape Town. And there's a crisis that we're told every time that there are parts of land that are being released, and people are not fighting for empty sites. They're fighting for housing to be on these sites. But equally, what I must acknowledge in this conversation is that social housing is in crisis. Social housing is in crisis in the context of funding. Less than 2% of the funding, national funding, goes to social housing. And that means that less than 3,000 social housing units across the country would be possible. And that's a crisis. And this is the only form of housing at this particular point that facilitates people moving closer to the city centers. And we must protect the delivery of social housing. And that's why national government must come to the party as well and allocate more funding and more grants to social housing. And also more needs to be said as well in terms of the management and regulation of social housing, so that people can live a more decent life and not be charged exorbitantly because of poorly managed social housing. But in the final analysis, what we're saying is that the city must look at precinct developments in terms of these sites and not continue these ceremonial releases of land that do not get to be built at any point in time. So that's a position that we've taken.
Yeah. You know, Brett, Buhle's mentioned quite an interesting fact as well when we're going to distinguish between social houses versus affordable housing. But also I want to take us back to even when the party founder and leader of your party, the Good Party, Patricia de Lille, when she was the mayor of the city of Cape Town, and some of these announcements were made as far back as then as possible. I mean, now that we fast forward to 2025 and we're sitting with the same kind of sites, but no tangible implementation that can be shown as well, as the Good Party, stemming from a point where you have been privy to these projects and plans that haven't taken flight as well, how does that also fair for you as the Good Party, knowing that you've had members such as yourself and Patricia de Lille who are part of these plans and they still haven't borne fruition?
Well, Masa, it's extremely frustrating. And when the inner city affordable housing sites, the 11 sites that Buhle referred to, were announced in July 2017 and then released by way of public tender in September 2017, we were very hopeful that we were going to make some progress. But the pushback, even while we were still in the city, which ultimately led to us leaving the Democratic Alliance and Council, was unbelievable. And the Democratic Alliance has an incoherent position around the use of public land for public purposes like housing. And so to have announced really exciting projects, to get the private developers and the social housing companies to partner and to bid on those projects, which is what happened. But for those bids never to be opened was very disheartening. And that's why we continue to fight in our parliament, in the legislature, in our councils, for affordable and social housing to be built on well-located parcels of land, which we know exist, and which for a long time the Democratic Alliance said we don't have land. And we disproved that narrative very, very quickly. And now what we're seeing, and as I said earlier, is the re-announcement of the same parcels of land that Patricia de Lille and I announced to the media and to the public in September 2017, exactly the same parcels of land. They have adjusted some of the yields on the sites, and as Buhle is saying, in some cases there's fewer yield for social housing, but it's the same parcels of land that have been re-announced as if they've discovered something new. And it's very frustrating because we think it's performative and not really sincere.
You know, Reclaim the City, the Reclaim the City campaign, Ndifuna was largely part of it too. We know about, the old Woodstock Hospital, now Sissigul House, with some prime properties also near Sea Point, where the city of Cape Town has taken those who have legally occupied those buildings and turned them into homes now, taken them to court on that to get them out of those buildings. And you have assisted when it comes to those residents too. So considering the efforts of Reclaim the City and the court cases that have taken place between those residents and the city of Cape Town, are you believing and trusting that the city is serious about redressing this spatial planning?
Masa, thank you very much for that question. And speaking about Sissigul House and the seriousness of the city to redress spatial planning, one can't help to think that there's lack of seriousness on the part of the city in terms of seriously redressing spatial apartheid. These are the same people that have taken us to court on the Tafelberg matter to say that they have no, the DA, Democratic Alliance-led government, which is the same party that is leading the municipality. They've taken us to court to say that they have no responsibility to redress spatial apartheid or to build social housing in a specified location. So there's some level of unseriousness on the part of the Democratic Alliance. Maybe there are some things that are deeply ingrained in their bloodstreams that need to be taken out by force in the context of making them see the importance of the well-located parts of land to be used for their social value, because the ideological orientation of the city of Cape Town and that of the DA is that of viewing land as a mere commodity and not using land for a social value. And that's what continues to characterize them now, even in terms of the sites that are being released. They're using these parcels of land as cash grabs rather than using these parcels of land for their social value and making sure that the most vulnerable in our society, those that have been pushed previously to the margins of society, get to move closer to the inner city. Now, on the same breath, even in terms of Sissigul House, the old Woodstock Hospital, the city of Cape Town has spent quite a lot of money, on court, but also a lot of money on a company called REX, saying that they must facilitate a process of meaningful engagement for purposes of taking the personal circumstances to evict the people that are staying in Woodstock Hospital. Now, we're fundamentally opposed to the idea of an eviction. And if the city succeeds to evict the people that are staying in Sissigul House, more than 1,000 people that are there, that would be the biggest eviction since the dawn of democracy. That would be the biggest eviction since District 6. Now, that cannot happen when we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis that is growing at 178,000 annually. And a lot of people are still in the backlog waiting for housing. And now where would over 1,000 people go if the city successfully evicts people? But an interesting turn of events in the Urban Land Justice Gathering that we had, where the political debate, Brett was part of, the MMC of Human Settlements in the city of Cape Town had announced that there won't be a mass eviction at Sissigul House, and we hope that they will stick to that and stop using taxpayers' money then on frivolous processes like REX, doing meaningful engagement. Rather, they should see these occupations as lived alternatives. We must prefigure housing solutions. The people that are staying in the old Woodstock Hospital are people that have prefigured housing solutions. These are people that were evictees, and that occupation became people-led transitional housing, where the state has not built any. And there isn't even to this day any social housing unit that has been built in the city center of Cape Town. And that's an indictment on this current, on this administration. They can't be releasing sites without building these social housings that we need. So there's some level of unseriousness, Massa, that must be addressed. But we hope that they will stop criminalizing people that are staying in occupations, because the people that are in occupations today are in occupations because they've been failed by the state. They've fallen in the cracks of this housing system because the state is no longer providing housing to people. And I've said in the past that we have a shortfall. We have a shortfall of housing. And I'd said that in 1998, the state used to provide about 235,000 houses. And in 2022-2023 financial year, they were only able to provide 33,000 houses. And that's a serious and massive shortfall. And the state now that has failed people, and people are taking actions through occupations. It must regularize occupation and see them as viable lived alternatives for people that are in those spaces, so that we can see that they are serious about addressing spatial justice. We will see their seriousness of addressing spatial justice by redeveloping Sisukul House, by making sure that people that live at Ahmad Katata House in Waterfront remain there, and they engage with people around the redevelopment processes of this site that will cater for people that are currently staying there, to not be evicted. So
Yeah.
that's the only time that we'll see the seriousness in terms of addressing spatial justice.
Britt, before I let you both go, I just wanted to find out, as you know, member of council as well and a member of the opposition in the city, what can be done to ensure that there isn't a re-announcement of the same, that this announcement is the last one from 2017-2022, that it's the last one in 2025?
I think, Masa, the starting point is for the public and the media to hold these governments to account for the re-announcements. And it's not only the city of Cape Town, it's also the provincial government that is re-announcing projects that have been announced previously. And I'll give you one example. About 2 weeks before the fruit and veg site was announced by Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis, Premier Alan Winde announced a project called Founders Garden. Now, Founders Garden was in a 2010 Central City Regeneration Program that was presented by Premier Helen Zille when she was the Premier of the province. And between 2010 and 2025, nothing happened except the renaming of the project and its re-announcement. It was first called the Artscape Precinct. It was announced in 2025 as the Founders Garden Project. And between 2010 and 2025, it was twice referred to as going to be a release for social housing, once in 2016 and again in 2019. So that project's been announced 4 times. So I think we all have to, the public has to, and the media have to stop clapping hands every time there's an announcement and we're promised a pipeline of housing, because as Buhle says, we don't need announcements about releases of land. We're not looking for empty parcels of land. We actually need the housing to be built. And in 20 years, they haven't been able to build a single unit in the inner city.
Brett Heron, Buhle Booi, thank you so much to you gentlemen for joining us this evening.